Trespassing HOA. Karen got the shock of her life when she barged into my barn. Turns out I keep a 700-pound black bear in the basement. My name is Jack Thornhill, and I've owned this 20-acre ranch outside of Pinewood County for nearly 15 years now. It's been in my family for generations, a place where I could escape the noise and restrictions of city living. The ranch sits at the very edge of the Pinewood Estates development, technically outside their jurisdiction, but close enough that some folks still think their rules apply to me. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The day started like any other Tuesday. I woke up at dawn, had my coffee on the porch watching the sun rise over the eastern pasture, and went about my morning chores. My ranch isn't fancy by any means, a modest 2-bedroom cabin, a large red barn with a workshop, and a few outbuildings. The barn has a cellar level underneath it that most folks don't know about, where I keep special equipment and, well, my rehabilitation project. You see, I'm a certified wildlife rehabilitator who specializes in large mammals. Most people in town know I occasionally take in injured deer or the odd fox, but very few know about Boris. Boris is a 700-pound black bear I rescued 3 years ago when he was just a cub. His mother had been killed by poachers, and he had a gunshot wound in his shoulder. The State Wildlife Agency approved my application to rehabilitate him with the understanding he'd eventually be released back into the wilderness when ready. But Boris had imprinted on humans too strongly to be safely released, so he became a permanent resident. I built him a secure, spacious enclosure in the barn's reinforced basement, complete with a cave-like den, a small pool, and plenty of enrichment activities. I even installed security cameras so I could monitor him from my phone. Only my close friends, the vet, and the wildlife officials know about Boris. It's all completely legal, but not something I advertise to avoid unwanted attention. Enter Deborah Wilkinson, or, as I've come to know her, HOA Karen. Deborah moved into Pinewood Estates about 6 months ago and quickly became the president of the Homeowners Association. Since then, she's been on a personal crusade to maintain property values by enforcing increasingly strict rules about everything from garbage can placement to the acceptable shades of beige for exterior paint. For weeks, I'd been getting letters in my mailbox claiming my property was an eyesore affecting community standards and demanding I comply with HOA regulations. I'd tossed them all in the trash, occasionally calling the county to confirm what I already knew. My property wasn't part of their jurisdiction, but Deborah wasn't someone who took no for an answer. Last Thursday, I was in town picking up supplies when my phone buzzed with a security alert. Someone had entered my property. I opened the app expecting to see a delivery person or maybe my neighbor Mike, who sometimes drops by to borrow tools. Instead, I saw Deborah in a powder blue pantsuit and matching clipboard, marching confidently across my front yard, taking pictures and making notes. I watched in disbelief as she circled my house, documenting what she probably thought were violations. She peered through windows, measured the height of my grass with a ruler, and even had the audacity to open my shed and poke around inside. My blood was boiling, but I stayed calm. I decided to head back immediately, though I knew it would take me at least 20 minutes to get home. What happened next still gives me a mixture of horror and satisfaction when I think about it. Instead of leaving after her unauthorized inspection, Deborah headed straight for my barn. The security footage showed her trying the side door, finding it locked, then discovering the main doors were unlatched. I'd left in a hurry and forgotten to secure them properly. "This is exactly the kind of negligence I'm talking about," I heard her mutter to herself as she pushed open the barn doors and stepped inside. Completely unacceptable for our community image. The barn's main floor is pretty standard. Tractor, tools, hay bales, workshop area. Nothing that would raise eyebrows. But then she spotted the door to the basement stairs. "What's this?" "Probably storing junk down there, violating multiple codes," she said to no one, her voice echoing in the empty barn. "The basement door has a sign that clearly reads, 'Authorized personnel only, wildlife rehabilitation area. Keep out.'" But apparently, Deborah considered herself exempt from such warnings. I watched in horror on my phone screen as she marched down the stairs, clipboard in hand. The basement level is divided into two sections: my supply area with feed, medical equipment, and records, and then beyond a heavy steel door with multiple locks is Boris's enclosure. The door between them is always locked and requires both a key and a keypad code, except that day. That day, I had been cleaning Boris's enclosure and giving him fresh bedding. I had gone back to the house to answer a call from the vet, intending to return and finish up before heading to town. In my haste, I'd left the inner door unlocked. What followed was something I couldn't have scripted better if I'd tried. My phone screen showed Deborah in the supply room, taking more pictures, shaking her head disapprovingly at the bags of specialized bear feed and the medical charts on the wall. What on earth is he keeping in here? This can't possibly be up to code, she muttered, moving toward the inner door. She tried the handle, found it unlocked, and pushed it open. The look on her face was priceless. Pure, undiluted disbelief. Then terror. Boris was awake from his afternoon nap and curious about the visitor. All 700 pounds of him rose up on his hind legs, standing nearly 7 feet tall, regarding Deborah with moderate interest. He wasn't aggressive. Boris is actually quite gentle. But he is, unmistakably, a massive black bear. Deborah's scream could probably be heard in the next county. She dropped her clipboard, stumbled backward, and froze against the wall. Boris, startled by the scream, dropped back to all fours and made a low, rumbling sound. "Help! Somebody help!" she screamed, plastered against the wall, too terrified to move. Boris, now curious about this loud new person, ambled forward a few steps to investigate, sniffing the air. From Deborah's perspective, it must have looked like the end times. From mine, reviewing the footage later, it was clear Boris was just being his usual inquisitive self, probably hoping she had treats like I usually do when I visit. I arrived, home in record time, tires spitting gravel as I skidded to a stop in my driveway. I could hear Deborah's screams from outside the barn. Running inside and down to the basement, I found exactly what the security footage had shown me. Deborah pressed against the wall, wide-eyed and hyperventilating, while Boris sat on his haunches about 10 feet away, looking more confused than, "Anything? Don't move!" I shouted as I entered, though she was clearly incapable of movement anyway. I calmly walked between them, facing Boris. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, pulling a honey treat from my pocket. "It's okay, big guy. Go on back to your corner now." Boris recognized me immediately, took the treat gently from my hand, and lumbered back to his sleeping area, apparently losing interest in our visitor. I turned to Deborah, whose face had gone from paper white to an interesting shade of purple. "You keep a bear? A bear? Are you insane?" She finally managed to sputter. "I'm a licensed wildlife rehabilitator," I explained calmly, showing her my ID card, which I always keep in my wallet. "Boris is here legally. All the paperwork is filed with the state wildlife agency. He was injured by poachers and can't survive in the wild." I guided her upstairs, her legs shaking so badly I was worried she might collapse. Once in the safety of the main barn, she seemed to recover some of her composure and her audacity. "This is completely unacceptable," she declared, her voice still trembling. "Keeping dangerous wild animals in a residential area. The HOA will be filing a formal complaint. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." I just stared at her for a moment, trying to process the sheer nerve. "Ms. Wilkinson," I said quietly, "you are currently trespassing on private property. I have video evidence of you entering my home and outbuildings without permission. That's breaking and entering. I could call the sheriff right now." Her face went pale again. I was conducting an inspection." My property is not part of your HOA, I interrupted. Never has been. I've kept all the letters you've sent as evidence of harassment, and now I have video of you trespassing and breaking into my buildings. Would you like me to play that for the sheriff? Or would you prefer to leave now and never set foot on my property again? The realization seemed to dawn on her slowly, then all at once. She'd overstepped, legally and literally, and she knew it. Furthermore, I continued, Boris is here with full knowledge and permission of state wildlife authorities. I have all the necessary permits and inspections. If you file a complaint, you'll only be drawing attention to your own illegal actions today. Without another word, Deborah straightened her now dusty pantsuit, lifted her chin, and walked stiffly to her car. I followed at a distance, arms crossed, watching as she drove away, gravel spitting from under her tires. The morning after Deborah's unwelcome visit, I called my attorney, James Harrington. We've been friends since high school, and he's helped me navigate the legal complexities of wildlife rehabilitation permits for years. I explained the situation and sent him the security footage. He laughed so hard I thought he might need medical attention. "Jack," he said when he finally caught his breath, "this is gold. Pure gold. Not only do you have her dead to rights on trespassing and breaking and entering, but the look on her face when she saw Boris, priceless. No judge in the county would side with her after seeing this footage. I wasn't interested in pressing charges, though. What I wanted was simple, to be left alone. James drafted a formal cease and desist letter citing the evidence of trespassing and the legal documentation proving my property's exemption from HOA regulations. He also included screenshots from the security footage, tastefully selected ones that showed Deborah clearly entering buildings without permission, but none that would humiliate her by showing her terror upon meeting Boris. I'm not cruel, after all. The letter was delivered to both Deborah's personal address and the HOA office by courier the next day. By that afternoon, my phone was ringing. It was the HOA's attorney, sounding surprisingly conciliatory. They wanted to resolve the situation amicably and avoid any unnecessary legal entanglements. Translation: Deborah had shown them the letter. They'd realized how completely indefensible her actions were, and they were scrambling to avoid a lawsuit. Word travels fast in small communities like Pinewood County. By the weekend, the story had spread like wildfire. It started with Mike, my neighbor who sits on the HOA board, who couldn't help sharing what had happened during their emergency meeting after receiving my letter. According to him, Deborah had tried to spin the story as her investigating dangerous conditions, but fell apart when someone asked why she'd entered a clearly marked private barn. The story grew with each telling, as such stories tend to do. By Monday, I overheard at the feed store that Deborah had been chased up a ladder by the bear. By Wednesday, the version at the diner included her fainting dead away and having to be carried out by paramedics. By the following weekend, someone at the farmer's market was claiming Boris had actually spoken to her, telling her to leave his home alone. I didn't correct any of these embellishments. The truth was entertaining enough, and the mythologizing seemed to be serving a purpose, establishing a clear boundary around my property that no one else was tempted to cross. The practical effects were immediate. The HOA letters stopped coming. The veiled threats about community standards disappeared. When the HOA distributed its monthly newsletter, there was a new item in the important reminders section. Please respect property boundaries and be aware that not all nearby properties fall under Pinewood Estate's jurisdiction. Personal interactions were more complicated. The first time I saw Deborah after the incident was at Garrett's grocery the following Tuesday. I was in the produce section selecting tomatoes when I glimpsed her at the end of the aisle. Our eyes met briefly. Her face flushed crimson, and she abandoned her half-filled cart, making a beeline for the exit. Part of me felt bad for her humiliation, but a larger part remembered the weeks of harassment, the audacious trespassing, and the look of smug superiority on her face as she documented my supposed violations. The second time we crossed paths was at the Pinewood County Fair 2 weeks later. I was there with Boris, actually. The wildlife agency had a small educational booth, and Boris was in a specially designed secure enclosure, wearing his training collar and muzzle as required for public appearances. A small crowd had gathered to hear the wildlife officer explain bear behavior and conservation efforts. Deborah rounded the corner with a group of HOA ladies, stopped dead in her tracks when she saw Boris, went pale, then composed herself with visible effort. Instead of fleeing, she lifted her chin and walked deliberately in the opposite direction, explaining loudly to her companions that she found such displays distasteful and potentially dangerous. One of her friends, a woman named Patricia, whom I'd met at community events, broke away from the group and approached the booth later, full of questions about wildlife rehabilitation. "Don't mind Deborah," she whispered as she left. "She's having a hard time living this down." The most significant change came from my neighbors in the Pinewood Estates development. People who had previously regarded me with suspicion, influenced by Deborah's campaign against my eyesore property, now waved when they drove past. Some even stopped to chat if I was working near the road. Several confessed they'd always been uncomfortable with the HOA's aggressive tactics but hadn't wanted to speak up. Mike, my neighbor who sits on the HOA board, became my unofficial ambassador. Whenever new residents moved in, he made a point of explaining that Thornhill Ranch wasn't subject to HOA rules, adding cryptically that the last person who tried to enforce them had a real bear of a time. It became something of an inside joke in the community. As for Boris, he's become something of a local legend, though few have actually seen him in person. The Wildlife Agency uses him for educational programs twice a year, safely introducing him to small groups under controlled conditions. Kids love him, completely unbothered by his size once they've been properly educated about respecting wild animals. Adults tend to maintain a more sensible distance, but their interest is no less keen. The incident led to some positive changes in my own practices as well. I instituted better security measures, including automatic locks on the barn, doors, and a more sophisticated alert system that differentiates between known visitors and strangers. I had the county surveyor come out and place official markers along my property lines, and I installed clearer private property and no trespassing signs at all potential entry points. I also reached out to the county extension office and organized a community workshop on living alongside wildlife, not just bears, but mountain lions, coyotes, and other creatures that call our region home. To my surprise, it was well attended, with over 40 people showing up, including several from the Pinewood Estates development. Deborah was conspicuously absent, but 3 other HOA board members came, asked thoughtful questions, and even stayed afterward to discuss ways to make their landscaping guidelines more wildlife-friendly. 6 months after the incident, as it had come to be known, I received an unexpected envelope in the mail. It contained a brief, formal note from Deborah, not exactly apologizing, but acknowledging that she had overstepped certain boundaries and expressing hope that we could move forward as neighbors with mutual respect. It wasn't much, but from what I'd heard about her character, it represented significant effort. I replied with an equally brief note accepting her olive branch and included an invitation to the next Wildlife Education Day, mentioning that Boris would be there but promising he would remain secured at all times. I didn't expect her to come, and she didn't, but the gesture itself felt important, a recognition that even after conflict, coexistence is possible. A year later, things had settled into a new normal. The HOA found other crusades that didn't involve my property. Deborah eventually stepped down as president, though rumors suggested it had more to do with disagreements over the community pool renovations than with the bear incident. I still see her occasionally around town, and while we'll never be friends, we've achieved a kind of detente, acknowledging each other with civil nods when our paths cross. I still have the security footage saved on an external hard drive. On particularly rough days, I pour myself a bourbon, sit on the porch watching the sunset over my imperfect, non-HOA compliant property, and sometimes pull it up on my laptop. Deborah's face when she first sees Boris never fails to make me smile, not out of cruelty, but as a reminder that sometimes the universe delivers perfect justice without any help from us. The whole experience taught me something about boundaries, how to set them, how to enforce them, and how to respect them. My property line is clearer now, both literally and figuratively. The community understands where their authority ends and my liberty begins. And I've learned that good communication up front can prevent conflicts down the road. As for Boris, he remains blissfully unaware of his role in local politics and property disputes. He continues his happy existence, enjoying his spacious enclosure, the enrichment activities I provide, and his twice-yearly outings as an educational ambassador. Sometimes when I'm with him, checking his health or just keeping him company, I wonder if he remembers the screaming woman in the blue pantsuit. If bears could laugh, I think he would. In the end, good fences make good neighbors. And sometimes what's behind those fences makes for even better stories, stories that grow with each telling, becoming part of the fabric of a community's shared history. In Pinewood County, pulling a Deborah has become shorthand for overstepping one's bounds and getting a well-deserved comeuppance. I can live with that legacy. And as for me, I'll continue my quiet life on Thornhill Ranch, rehabilitating wildlife, keeping my distance from HOA politics, and making sure, absolutely sure, that I never again forget to lock the door to the barn basement.